Morning everyone. Now this is going to be a chapter and then I'm going to show you my narrative arc diagram so you can have a look at yours and you can check that you've done it correctly. And then there's going to be another chapter tomorrow and I will show you how I've opened my story and written my exposition. So what you can do is you can get your purple pen and you can have a look at your narrative arc and you can have a look at your opening writing and you can see if you've included all the things that we really need in a bit of creative writing. We are looking for capital letters at the beginning of sentences and proper nouns. We're looking for interesting vocabulary, not necessarily the vocabulary you've learnt that's new if it doesn't fit. We're looking at variations in paragraph lengths and using the different types of sentences, so complex and compound and simple sentences if you want to add some tension. And most important of all, we're going to be looking at showing and not telling. So you're not going to say something like the character was nervous. You're going to say that the character's hands were shaking, they were sweating. You are giving more background detail, which makes the reader have to use their imagination to create the character in their mind. Okay, so let's carry on with chapter 7 of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Chapter 7, an unknown species of whale. Of course, we know it's not a whale. He's just fallen into the sea, remember. The unexpected fall so stunned me that I have no clear recollection of my sensations at the time. I was at first drawn down to a depth of about 20 feet. I am a good swimmer, though without pretending to rival Byron or Edgar Poe, who were both great writers, who were masters of the art. And in that plunge I did not lose my presence of mind. 2 vigorous strokes brought me to the surface of the water. My first care was to look for the frigate. Had the crew seen me disappear? Had the Abraham Lincoln veered round? Would the captain put out a boat? Might I hope to be saved? All those rhetorical questions. The darkness was intense. I caught a glimpse of a black mass disappearing in the east, its beacon lights dying out in the distance. It was the frigate. I was lost. Help! Help! I shouted, swimming towards the Abraham Lincoln in desperation. My clothes encumbered me, so they held him down. They seemed glued to my body and paralysed my movements. I was sinking. I was suffocating. Help! This was my last cry. My mouth filled with water. I struggled against being drawn down the abyss. Suddenly my clothes were seized by a strong hand, and I felt myself quickly drawn up to the surface of the sea. And I heard, yes, I heard those words pronounced in my ear. If master would be so good as to lean on my shoulder, master would swim with much greater ease. Oh, he's gone Italian. Nice use of a semicolon there, look. I seized with one hand my faithful consul's arm. Is it you? Said I. You? Myself, answered Consul, and waiting master's orders. That shock threw you as well as me into the sea? No, but being in my master's service, I followed him. The worthy fellow thought that was but natural. And the frigate? I asked. The frigate, replied Consul, turning on his back. I think that master had better not count on too much on her. You think so? I say that at the time I threw myself into the sea, I heard the men at the wheel say, the screw and the rudder are broken. Broken? Yes, broken by the monster's teeth. It is the only injury the Abraham Lincoln has sustained. But it is a bad lookout for us. She no longer answers her helm. Then we are lost. Perhaps so, calmly answered Consul. However, we have still several hours before us, and one can do a good deal in some hours. Consul's imperturbable coolness set me up again. I swam more vigorously, but cramped by my clothes, which stuck to me like a leaden weight, I had great difficulty in bearing up. Consul saw this. Will master let me make a slit? Said he, and slipping an open knife under my clothes, he ripped them up from top to bottom very rapidly. Then he cleverly slipped them off me, while I swam for both of us. Then I did the same for Consul, and we continued to swim near to each other. Nevertheless, our situation was no less terrible. Perhaps our disappearance had not been noticed. If it had been, the frigate could not tack without being its helm. That means it couldn't turn round because the helm, the big wheel that turns the rudder, was broken. Consul argued on this supposition, which means what he's put forward, and laid his plans accordingly. This phlegmatic, so doesn't show a lot of emotion, boy was perfectly self-possessed. We then decided that, as our only chance of safety was being picked up by the Abraham Lincoln's boats, we ought to manage so as to wait for them as long as possible. I resolved then to husband our strength, so to protect and look after their strength, to keep hold of it as long as possible, so that both should not be exhausted at the same time. And this is how we managed. While one of us lay on our back quite still, with arms crossed and legs stretched out, the other would swim and push the other on in front. This towing business did not last more than 10 minutes each, and relieving each other thus, we could swim on for some hours, perhaps till daybreak. Poor chance! But hope is so firmly rooted in the heart of man. Moreover, there were two of us. Indeed, I declare, though it may seem improbable, if I sought to destroy all hope, if I wished to despair, I could not. The collision of the frigate with the cetacean had occurred about 11 o'clock the evening before. I reckoned then we should have 8 hours to swim before sunrise, an operation quite practicable if we relieved each other. The sea, very calm, was in our favour. Sometimes I tried to pierce the intense darkness that was only dispelled by the phosphorescence caused by our movements. I watched the luminous waves that broke over my hand, whose mirror-like surface was spotted with silvery rings. One might have said that we were in a bath of quicksilver. Quicksilver is the old word for mercury. Near 1 o'clock in the morning I was seized with dreadful fatigue. My limbs stiffened under the strain of violent cramp. Consul was obliged to keep me up, and our preservation devolved on him alone. I heard the poor boy pant. His breathing became short and hurried. I found that he could not keep up much longer. "Leave me, I said to him. "Leave my master? Never," replied he. "I would drown first." Just then the moon appeared through the fringes of a thick cloud that the wind was driving to the east. The surface of the sea glittered with its rays. This kindly light reanimated us, gave them life again. My head got better again. I looked at all the points of the horizon. I saw the frigate. She was 5 miles from us and looked like a dark mass, hardly discernible, but no boats. I would have cried out, but what good would it have been at such a distance? My swollen lips could utter no sounds. Consul could articulate some words, and I heard him repeat at intervals, "Help, help!" Our movements were suspended for an instant. We listened. It might be only a singing in the air, but it seemed to me as if a cry answered the cry from Consul. Did you hear?" I murmured. Yes, and Consul gave one more despairing call. This time there was no mistake. A human voice responded to ours. Was it the voice of another unfortunate creature abandoned in the middle of the ocean, some other victim of the shock sustained by the vessel? Or rather, was it a boat from the frigate that was hailing us in the darkness? Consul made a last effort, and leaning on my shoulder while I struck out in a despairing effort, he raised himself half out of the water, then fell back exhausted. "What did you see?" "I saw," murmured he. "I saw, but do not talk. Reserve all your strength." What had he seen? Then, I know not why, the thought of the monster came into my head for the first time. But that voice! The time is past for Jonahs to take refuge in whales' bellies. That's an old Bible story. However, Consul was towing me again. He raised his head sometimes, looked before us, and uttered a cry of recognition, which was responded to by a voice that came nearer and nearer. I scarcely heard it. My strength was exhausted. My fingers stiffened. Look at all these semicolons. My hand afforded me support. No longer. My mouth convulsively opening, so he has no control over it, filled with salt water. Cold crept over me. I raised my head for the last time, and then I sank. At this moment, a hard body struck me. I clung to it. Look at the colon. Then I felt that I was being drawn up, that I was brought to the surface of the water, that my chest collapsed. I fainted. It is certain that I came to, thanks to the vigorous rubbings that I received. I half opened my eyes. "Consul," I murmured. "Does master call me?" asked Consul. Just then, by the waning light of the moon, which was sinking down to the horizon, I saw a face which was not Consul's, and which I immediately recognised. "Ned!" I cried. "The same, sir, who is seeking his prize," replied the Canadian. "Were you thrown into the sea by the shock of the frigate?" "Yes, Professor, but more fortunate than you. I was able to find footing almost directly upon a floating island." "An island?" "Or more correctly speaking, on our gigantic novel." "Explain yourself, Ned." "Only I soon found out why my harpoon had not entered its skin and was blunted." "Why, Ned, why?" "Because, Professor, that beast is made of sheet iron." Canadian's last words produced a sudden revolution in my brain. I wriggled myself quickly to the top of the being, or object, half out of the water, which served us for a refuge, safe place. I kicked it. It was evidently a hard, impenetrable body, and not the soft substance that forms the bodies of great marine mammalia. But this hard body might be a bony carapace. Now, a carapace is a shell, like that of the antediluvian animals from Australia, and I should be free to class this monster among amphibious reptiles, such as tortoises or alligators. Well, no. The blackish back that supported me was smooth, polished, without scales. The blow produced a metallic sound, and incredible though it may be, it seemed, I might say, as if it was made of riveted plates. There was no doubt about it. This monster, this natural phenomenon that had puzzled the learned world and overthrown and misled the imagination of seamen of both hemispheres, was, it must be owned, a still more astonishing phenomenon, insomuch as it was a simply human construction. We had no time to lose, however. We were lying upon the back of a sort of submarine boat, which appeared, as far as I could judge, like a huge fish of steel. Ned Land's mind was made up on this point. Consul and I could only agree with him. Just then a bubbling began at the back of this strange thing, which was evidently propelled by a screw, and it began to move. A screw is a propeller. We'd only just time to seize hold of the upper part, which rose about 7 feet out of the water, and happily its speed was not great. "As long as it sails horizontally," muttered Ned Land, "I do not mind, but if it takes a fancy to dive, I wouldn't give 2 straws for my life." The Canadian might have said still less. It became really necessary to communicate with the beings, whatever they were, shut up inside the machine. I searched all over the outside for an aperture, as an opening or a hole, a panel, or a manhole, to use the technical expression. But the lines of the iron rivets, solidly driven into the joints of the iron plates, were clear and uniform. Besides, the moon disappeared then and left us in total darkness. At last, this long night passed. My indistinct remembrance prevents my describing all the impressions it made. I can only recall one circumstance. During some lulls of the wind and sea, I fancied I heard several times vague sounds, a sort of fugitive harmony. Fugitive is somebody on the run, somebody trying to hide from the law. A sort of fugitive harmony produced by distant words of command. What was then the mystery of this submarine craft, of which the whole world vainly sought an explanation? What kind of beings existed in this strange boat? What mechanical agent caused its prodigious speed? Daybreak appeared. The morning mists surrounded us, but they soon cleared off. I was about to examine the hull, which formed on deck a kind of horizontal platform, when I felt it gradually sinking. "Oh, confound it!" cried Ned Land, kicking the resounding plate. "Open, you inhospitable rascals!" Happily, the sinking movement ceased. Suddenly a noise like ironworks violently pushed aside came from the interior of the boat. One iron plate was moved. A man appeared, uttered an odd cry, and disappeared immediately. Some moments after, 8 strong men with masked faces appeared noiselessly and drew us down into their formidable machine. Ooh. Right, now I'm going to show you my story arc. Okay, now we had a look at this last week, and remember we've got the tension here, and then we draw a graph of the narrative progression. Okay, now my exposition, they always say you should write about something you know. So I'm going to have the hero of my story, the heroine rather, as a middle-aged English teacher. I know a lot about them. Now the complication of my story is going to be a strange beast has been spotted behind A block, and it's going to lead to an attack on gardening club. Right, so there's a beast behind A block, attacks gardening club. The climax is we trap the beast in the polytunnel, fight with the beast. It turns out that it's a creature that's been created by Mr. Keys in his lab, and the resolution is we keep it as the school pet. Right, so I've got the plan of my story here, and then what I can do is I can add notes to my diagram. So this middle-aged English teacher, what shall I call her? I know I shall call her Sally. There you go. So I'm not going to call it Becky because that would just give it away that it was me. Sally, now she's going to be incredibly glamorous. So she's a bit more like Miss Ray than me. I'm going to put lots of detail in. So I'm going to remember my zooms. I'm going to zoom in and out. And it's going to open with a description. I think I've been inside too long. A description of the classroom. And it's going to move to the A block area. So I will need to make sure that my paragraphs on this move seamlessly into my description of the strange beast. Now the strange beast is going to need a lot of description as well. Now this is going to give me a great opportunity to use similes and metaphors. So I can have lots of that in there. Now the beast, I can't draw very well, but I think it's going to look quite a lot like a hairy pig with great big horns. There we go. So, cool. I am so amazing at art. Right, so here's my beast. There we go. So, I'm now going to go away and I'm going to have a think about similes and metaphors I can use. Let's give you some big horns. Yeah. There we go. So I'm going to have a think about some similes and metaphors that I can use to describe my beast. I need to describe my classroom. I need to describe this character, Sally. But the focus is going to be to show and not tell. Right, so I'm going to go away now and I'm going to write my beginning here. And then together, at the end of your next chapter, we can have a look at my work and you can make some improvements to yours too. Okay? Right, take care everybody. Stay safe. Be kind to your parents. Be kind to everybody who's in the house with you because these are difficult times for everybody. But look after yourselves.